The Whisper in the Throne Room. The throne room of Xelon Palace was a place of silence and fear. Tall crystal pillars rose to the ceiling, glowing faintly with blue light. The floor was made of black stone, polished so well that a man could see his own reflection. Guards in golden armor stood like statues along the walls, their eyes cold and sharp. No one spoke unless ordered. No one dared to move without command. The human ambassador, Captain Elias Ward, walked slowly into the hall. His boots echoed against the stone. He felt the weight of many alien eyes watching him. For weeks he had been a guest in this palace, brought here as a symbol of peace between the human colonies and the alien empire of Xelon. Yet he knew deep inside that he was still a stranger. At the end of the long hall sat the alien queen, Seraphina. She was tall, her silver skin glowing softly under the light of the pillars. Her eyes were not like those of her people. Where most of her kind had cold, sharp eyes, hers carried something different, something warmer yet full of sadness. A golden crown rested upon her head, but she looked more like a prisoner than a ruler. Elias bowed. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady though his heart beat fast. The councilors sat on both sides of the hall. They were whispering in low tones, sneering at the sight of a human standing before their queen. To them, he was nothing more than an outsider, a lesser being. But Queen Seraphina raised her hand and the whispers stopped. "You may rise," she said, her voice calm but heavy, as if every word carried a hidden burden. Elias lifted his head and met her eyes. For a moment he thought he saw pain behind her royal mask. He had seen that look before on soldiers who carried too many scars inside them. He did not know why, but it made his chest tighten. The queen leaned forward slightly, her fingers pressing against the arms of her throne. The air in the hall grew heavy. Everyone waited, thinking she would speak of politics, of treaties, or of peace between their worlds. But then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she said words that froze the entire palace. "I wish you were my husband, human." The words echoed across the throne room. For a second, silence fell. Then came a wave of shocked gasps. Councilors rose to their feet. Guards turned their heads in disbelief. The entire palace seemed to shake with the weight of her confession. Elias blinked. He thought he had misheard. "Your Majesty?" he whispered, but Queen Seraphina's eyes did not waver. She looked directly at him, as if the rest of the hall did not exist. Her silver lips pressed together, and though her voice was steady, her eyes shone with an emotion no one had ever seen from her before. "I wish you were my husband," she repeated. Louder this time, the hall erupted. "This is madness," shouted one councilor, his long cloak sweeping across the floor as he stood. "An insult to our traditions," cried another. "Has the queen lost her mind?" whispered a guard under his breath. Elias stood frozen. His heart pounded, his mind racing. Why would she say such a thing? Was it a test? A trap? Or was it the truth? The queen raised her hand again, silencing the room. But her voice trembled now, as though every word cost her strength. "For years," she said, her tone echoing through the chamber, "I have been bound by duty, by chains of tradition and fear. My people see me as their ruler, but I am still a woman who feels pain, who longs for something real." She looked straight at Elias, her eyes bright like stars filled with sorrow. "This human has shown me respect that even my own kind deny me." The hall buzzed with anger, confusion, and fear. The councilors argued, their voices rising like thunder. The guards shifted uneasily. Some of them even reached for their weapons. Elias felt the tension rising. He stepped forward slightly, his voice firm but calm. "Your Majesty, I am honored by your words." "But silence," one of the councilors roared. "You will not speak in this hall, human." Two guards moved closer to Elias, their hands on their blades. The atmosphere grew darker, as if violence was only a breath away. But then Queen Seraphina stood. The sound of her rising silenced everyone. The glow of the crystal pillars seemed to bend toward her, as if even the palace itself bowed to her will. She looked at her councilors, her guards, and finally back at Elias. Her voice cut through the storm of whispers like a blade. "You will not touch him," she declared. "From this moment forward, Captain Elias Ward is under my protection. Anyone who dares harm him, dares to defy me." The hall fell into silence once more. The councilors stared at her, their faces pale with shock. The guard stepped back slowly. Elias could hardly breathe. He had come here expecting politics, perhaps even danger, but never this. The queen of an alien empire had just confessed her heart in front of her entire palace. And though he did not understand it yet, he knew this was not just about feelings. This was the beginning of something far bigger, something that would shake the empire to its very core. The hidden past the throne room was still in shock after the queen's confession. Whispers spread like fire through the palace. Councilors argued in private chambers, guards muttered in corridors, and servants carried rumors like shadows through the halls. But behind the golden doors of her private chamber, Queen Seraphina sat alone, staring into the flickering light of a crystal lamp. Her words still echoed in her mind. "I wish you were my husband, human." She had not planned to say it. It had escaped her lips like a cry breaking free after years of silence. Yet once spoken, it could not be taken back. As the palace slept restlessly, her thoughts drifted to the past, the chains she had carried long before Elias Ward ever set foot in her world. Seraphina had not always been a queen. She was once a young girl of silver skin and bright eyes, filled with dreams of freedom. Her mother had been kind, her father stern but loving. She remembered laughing in the gardens, running barefoot through the glowing trees of the palace forest, believing her life would always be filled with peace. But peace never lasted long in the empire of Zeylon. At the age of 17, Seraphina was told she would marry. Not for love, not for happiness, but for politics. The council had chosen her husband, a powerful warlord named Kalor. He was feared across the stars, a man who won battles not with honor but with cruelty. Seraphina had begged her parents, "Please, do not give me to him." But duty weighed heavier than a daughter's tears. Her cries were ignored. On the day of her wedding, she walked down the crystal steps in a gown of gold, her heart breaking with each step. Kalor's eyes had been cold, his smile sharp. From the first night, she knew she was a prisoner in silks and jewels. He spoke to her only as property, never as a person. Every mistake, every defiance was punished. The court saw her as a trophy, not a queen. Her laughter faded, her spirit dimmed. Years passed, but not in joy. She learned to smile in public, to hide her pain behind royal grace. Yet in secret she wept in the dark. One night during the war with the human colonies, her life took another turn. Kalor had returned from battle wounded. His cruelty grew worse, his paranoia sharper. He locked her away in the palace, fearing betrayal even from his own wife. It was during that time that she first heard of the humans, not as enemies but as survivors. Reports spoke of human soldiers who fought not for conquest, but to protect each other. They risked their lives for comrades, carried their wounded on their backs, and treated prisoners with honor. To Seraphina, it sounded like a dream. In her world, mercy was weakness, kindness was forbidden. And then one day, fate brought Elias Ward. She had first seen him when he was captured after a failed human raid. Chained, bloodied, yet standing tall, Elias had been dragged before the court as a trophy. The council mocked him, called him primitive, a beast in human skin. Yet he had not bowed. His voice was steady when he said, "Even in defeat, I do not kneel to cruelty." For the first time in years, Seraphina's heart stirred. She had seen many warriors, but none had spoken like that. None had looked at the Queen of Zeylon not with fear, not with desire, but with simple respect. Later, when Elias was locked in the dungeon, Seraphina had gone to see him in secret. She had expected anger or arrogance. Instead, she found a man who spoke gently even to his enemies. He thanked her when she brought him water, though she was his jailer. He did not curse her people. He simply said, "One day kindness will matter more than power." Those words had haunted her ever since. Now, sitting in her chamber, Seraphina closed her eyes. Her husband, Kalor, was gone, killed in battle years ago. Yet the scars he left on her heart remained. The council had ruled in his absence, treating her like a puppet. They thought she had no will of her own, that she was too broken to resist. But then Elias came back, not as a prisoner this time, but as a guest of peace. He walked into the palace halls with calm strength, unbent by the weight of stairs. Every time he bowed to her, it was not out of fear, it was out of choice. Every word he spoke was filled with dignity, and Seraphina remembered the lonely nights, the chains of her past, the way her people had stripped her of humanity. She looked at him and thought, If I had a husband like this, perhaps I would not have lived as a shadow all these years. Her whisper in the throne room had not been strategy. It had not been politics. It was truth breaking free after too long, a confession not of power but of longing. Outside her chamber, guards stood alert. Inside, Serafina touched the crystal lamp with trembling fingers. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, yet deep inside she knew she did not regret it. For the first time in her life, she had spoken her heart, not as a queen, not as a prisoner, but as a woman. And though the palace shook with outrage, though the council plotted in the shadows, though danger pressed closer with every passing hour, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The human's dilemma. The next morning, Captain Elias Ward walked alone through the palace gardens. The air smelled of sweet crystal flowers, and glowing birds flitted between the silver branches. Yet Elias felt no peace. His mind was storming, his chest heavy. The queen's words from the throne room still echoed in his ears. "I wish you were my husband." Human, he had faced battles, stared death in the eyes, and survived wars. But nothing had prepared him for this. The ruler of an alien empire, his people's former enemy, had confessed something so personal, so dangerous, in front of her entire court. And now, the whole palace watched him differently. Servants bowed with fear instead of respect. Guards followed his steps, their eyes sharp, their hands ready on their blades. Councilors avoided him in daylight but whispered in shadows. Elias could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on him like a mountain. He stopped near a fountain of glowing water and stared at his reflection. "What have I walked into?" he muttered to himself. Behind him, a voice answered softly, "Into my world of chains." Elias turned. Queen Serafina stood there, dressed in a simple gown, her crown missing. Without the heavy jewels and silks, she looked less like a ruler and more like a woman who carried scars no one could see. "You should not be here without guards," Elias said quietly. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I do not trust them as much as I trust you," he frowned. "Your Majesty, what you said yesterday." "You put both of us in danger." "I know," she admitted, her eyes lowering. "But it was the truth." Elias felt his heart twist. Truth or not, it was madness. She was a queen. He was just a human soldier, a guest in her palace bound by fragile treaties. If the council saw him as a threat, war could break out again. His people might suffer. Yet when he looked at her eyes shining with both sorrow and courage, he could not bring himself to speak harshly. "Why me?" he asked at last. "You could have chosen any of your kind." "Why a human?" Serafina stepped closer. The sunlight reflected against her silver skin, making her glow like starlight. "Because you see me. Not as a crown, not as a trophy, not as a weapon of power. You look at me as if I am simply—" "Serafina." Her voice trembled. "Do you know how long it has been since someone did that?" Elias was silent. He had no answer. Later that day, the council summoned him. The council chamber was filled with towering aliens in long robes, their faces sharp with suspicion. One of them, Lord Valor, leaned forward. "Human, you are dangerous. The Queen's words have created disorder. What spell have you cast on her?" "No spell," Elias replied firmly. "I have done nothing but speak with honesty." "Honesty?" Another councilor sneered. "You think we believe a primitive race like yours can inspire our queen?" Elias clenched his fists, but he kept his voice calm. "Believe what you will, but I never asked for her words." The council murmured among themselves. Then Lord Valor's voice grew cold. "You will stay under watch. Any step against tradition and you will be executed." Elias bowed slightly, hiding his anger. They saw him as a threat not because of what he did, but because of what the queen felt. As he left the chamber, he thought, "If I stay, I may be killed. If I leave, she will face them alone." That night, Elias stood at the balcony of his guest chamber. The alien city stretched below, lights glowing like stars on the ground. He thought of his people waiting for him to return, of the fragile peace that could shatter at any moment. He thought of the queen, alone, trapped, yet brave enough to whisper the truth in front of her enemies. His mind battled itself. Should I stay loyal to my people or protect her? Should I follow duty or follow my heart? Footsteps approached. He turned to see Serafina entering quietly, her face lit by moonlight. "You should not be here," he said again, though softer this time. She ignored the warning. "They will move against you," she whispered. I can feel it. The council wants you gone. And what about you? Elias asked. They will turn on you too. She looked down, her hands trembling. They always have. But I will not let them harm you. Elias stepped closer. For a moment, silence wrapped around them. He saw her strength, but also her loneliness. He wanted to tell her that she was not alone, that he would not abandon her. But the words caught in his throat. Serafina, he began. But before he could finish, a sharp sound cut the night air. A whisper of steel sliding from a sheath. Elias spun around. A shadow moved at the edge of the balcony. A figure cloaked in black leapt forward, blade gleaming. Assassin! Elias shouted, pulling Serafina behind him. The attacker struck fast, but Elias was faster. He caught the alien's wrist, twisted hard, and sent the blade clattering to the floor. With a punch, he knocked the assassin down. Guards rushed in, too late to stop the attempt. As the guards dragged the assassin away, Elias stood breathless, his heart pounding. He looked at the queen, her eyes wide with fear, her body shaking. For the first time, he reached out and held her hand. You're safe, he said softly. She squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. No, Elias, we are not safe. Not anymore. Palace intrigue. The failed assassination shook the palace like thunder. Rumors spread through the corridors faster than fire. Servants whispered in fear. Guards doubled their patrols, and councilors gathered in secret chambers, their faces pale and angry. But one truth was clear. Someone inside the palace wanted both the human and the queen dead. Captain Elias Ward was summoned at dawn to the council chamber. The long table gleamed under the pale blue light of crystal torches. Councilors in dark robes sat like vultures waiting to strike. Queen Serafina was present, her expression calm but her hands tightly folded on the table. Lord Valor's voice cut through the silence. A human guest, and suddenly assassins crawl through our walls. Coincidence? I think not, another councilor sneered. He brings chaos. Remove him before more blood is spilled. Elias stood tall. The assassin came for the queen, not me. Or perhaps both, Valor said coldly. Your presence has poisoned her judgment, her confession has weakened the throne. Serafina's eyes flashed. Enough, she commanded. Her voice echoed like steel striking stone. Elias Ward is under my protection. The assassin was no human. He was one of our own. Ask yourselves, who among us gave the order? The chamber fell into silence. Councilors shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke. No one dared admit the truth. After the meeting, Elias followed Serafina into the private council garden. They will not stop, he warned. They fear your words more than my presence. If they cannot silence me, they will silence you. She looked at the glowing flowers around them, her eyes heavy with sorrow. I have lived under their chains for years. But when I saw you fight for me, when you held my hand without fear, I remembered something I thought I lost. My right to choose. Elias felt a strange warmth in his chest, but he forced himself to stay focused. Then you must be careful. You cannot show weakness. Serafina turned to him, her voice trembling. Is it weakness? To want to be free? He had no answer. That evening, the palace grew restless again. Councilors gathered secretly, cloaks hiding their faces. Inside a shadowed chamber, Valor spoke with venom. The queen is losing control. Her heart is turning toward the human. If this continues, our traditions will collapse. Another voice hissed. Then we must take the throne from her. Valor's eyes gleamed. Yes, if she will not obey, we will declare her unfit to rule. The people will listen, and the human. He will not live long enough to leave this palace. The council agreed in whispers. A coup had begun. Meanwhile, Elias walked the quiet halls uneasy. He knew danger was building, but he did not know from where it would strike. Guards eyed him with suspicion. Servants bowed too quickly, as if frightened of being seen near him. He paused when he heard voices behind a half-open door. He leaned closer, listening. The council meets tonight, one voice whispered. They plan to strip the queen of her crown. And the human, he will vanish before dawn. Elias's jaw tightened. He pushed the door open, but the servants scattered like frightened birds. Still, he had heard enough. He hurried to Serafina's chamber. When she saw his face, pale and tense, her heart sank. They are moving against you, he told her. Tonight. Her breath caught. I knew it would come. But so soon. Elias stepped closer. You cannot face them alone. If you defy them, they will call you a traitor to your own throne. And if you yield, they will destroy you anyway. She looked into his eyes, searching. What should I do, Elias? Tell me. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak from the heart. Fight. Not for them, not for their chains, but for yourself. And if you fall, then let me fall beside you. Her eyes glistened with tears. She reached out and touched his hand. You would stand with me even against your own safety? Yes, he said simply. Because I believe you deserve to be free. That night the council gathered in the grand chamber. The hall was filled with guards, nobles, and servants, summoned to witness the judgment of their queen. Valor rose, his voice booming. People of Zealand, our queen has broken the sacred code. She has spoken words of shame, words that betray our tradition. She is unfit to rule. The crowd murmured in shock. Seraphina sat tall on her throne, her face calm though her heart pounded. Elias stood at her side, unarmed but steady. Valor pointed at him. And this human, this outsider, corrupts her will. He must be removed for the safety of the empire. The hall erupted with shouts. Some agreed, others looked uneasy. Then Seraphina rose. Her voice carried over the chaos. Silence. The room froze. She stepped forward, her crown glinting under the light. You call me unfit because I speak truth. But what is a throne if it is built on chains? What is tradition if it destroys the soul? You fear the human because he reminds you of what you have lost, the courage to see me not as a crown but as a person. Her words struck the chamber like thunder. Some nobles bowed their heads ashamed. Others glared with hatred. Valor hissed, You disgrace us. But Seraphina stood tall. No, I free us. At her side, Elias felt the air shift. The palace was on the edge of war, between loyalty and rebellion, between freedom and chains. And deep inside he knew, this night would decide everything. Betrayal in the shadows. The grand chamber still trembled with the echo of Seraphina's words. She had stood against the council, her voice bold, her heart bare. Yet even as the crowd dispersed, Elias knew danger had not passed. In fact, it had only grown darker. That night the palace was cloaked in silence. Torches flickered in the hallways, shadows stretching like claws across the stone. The guards patrolled with uneasy steps, their eyes scanning every corner as if expecting death to emerge at any moment. Elias walked beside Seraphina through a hidden corridor that led to her private wing. He had insisted on escorting her after the tense confrontation. You cannot trust anyone tonight, he whispered. Seraphina gave him a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Not anyone? Not even the ones closest to you, Elias replied grimly. Hours later, as Seraphina rested, Elias remained awake in his chamber nearby. His instincts from years of war would not let him sleep. He sat by the window watching the alien city glow beneath the night sky. His hand never strayed far from the dagger strapped to his side. A soft knock came at his door. Elias stood instantly, his body tense. Slowly he opened it. It was a maid, one Seraphina trusted since childhood. Her name was Leora. Her silver hair was braided, her eyes full of urgency. Captain, she whispered, you must come. The queen is in danger. Elias's heart raced. What happened? She is calling for you, hurry. Without hesitation he followed. But as they moved through the twisting corridors, he noticed something strange. The guards were missing. The halls were too quiet. And the path Leora led him on did not lead toward Seraphina's chamber. It led downward toward the old parts of the palace. Elias slowed his steps. Where are we going? Leora glanced back, her face pale. This is the fastest way. His instincts screamed a warning. He reached for his dagger. In that moment, 3 figures stepped out of the shadows ahead, cloaked and armed. The glint of blades caught the torchlight. Elias's suspicion hardened into truth. You've led me into a trap, he said, his voice low. Leora trembled but did not meet his eyes. I had no choice. They threatened my family. The assassins closed in. Elias fought like a soldier who had survived 100 battles. The first assassin lunged, but Elias sidestepped and struck him hard in the throat. The second swung a curved blade, sparks flying as Elias blocked with his dagger. He countered with a swift kick, sending the attacker sprawling, but the third was faster. The blade slashed across Elias's arm, burning with pain. Blood dripped down his sleeve. Still, Elias refused to fall. With a roar, he disarmed the man and knocked him unconscious with a crushing blow. Breathing heavily, Elias turned to Leora. She had collapsed against the wall. tears streaming down her face. "They said if I didn't help they would kill my mother," she sobbed. "Forgive me, Captain." Elias's jaw tightened. He wanted to hate her, but he saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear Serafina carried. He lowered his dagger. "Go. Hide. But if you ever betray her again, nothing will save you." She nodded and fled into the shadows. Wounded and exhausted, Elias returned to Serafina's chamber. But what he found made his heart drop. The doors were broken open. The guards who were meant to protect her lay unconscious or dead on the floor. Inside, the queen's bed was empty. On the wall, written in dark alien ink, was a message. "The throne will not be shamed. The queen has been taken." Elias's blood ran cold. His hands clenched into fists. The council had made their move, striking not in open debate but in secret treachery. Serafina awoke in darkness. Her wrists were bound with chains of glowing metal that burned against her skin. She was inside an underground chamber far beneath the palace. The air smelled of damp stone and old blood. Torches flickered to reveal the faces of the conspirators. Lord Valor stood at the front, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You have dishonored the throne," he hissed. "You dare defy tradition for a human. You are no queen. You are a stain that must be erased." Serafina lifted her chin despite the pain in her wrists. "You think chains can silence truth? You are wrong. The people will see you for what you are, cowards hiding in shadows." Valor's face twisted with rage. He struck her across the face, but Serafina did not cry out. Instead, she met his glare with cold defiance. "You will break," Valor promised. "And when you do, your human will follow you into death." Back in the ruined chamber, Elias knelt beside the fallen guards, his hands shaking with fury. The betrayal burned deeper than his wounds. He knew the council had taken her. They would not stop until both she and he were destroyed. He rose to his feet, blood dripping down his arm, his dagger still in hand. His voice was low, filled with fire. "They want war in shadows?" he muttered. "Then I will bring light to every corner of their lies." For the first time since arriving in the palace, Elias was no longer a guest. He was a soldier again, and he would not stop until Serafina was free. The war of choices, the palace was no longer a place of peace. It had become a cage of whispers, betrayal, and fear. Every corridor seemed darker, every guard's eyes sharper, every word filled with hidden blades. And at the heart of it all, Queen Serafina was missing, taken by those sworn to serve her. Elias Ward stood in the shattered doorway of her empty chamber, his fists clenched, his wounded arm throbbing. Rage burned in him, but so did something else, a heavy question that weighed on his chest. What now? He was one human, a stranger in this empire. His duty was to his people, to return alive and protect the fragile treaty. If he died here, peace might collapse. But if he left Serafina behind, she would be executed in the shadows, her voice silenced forever. Duty to his people, or loyalty to her. It was a war inside his heart. At dawn, the council gathered in the throne room without their queen. Lord Valor sat in her place, his cold smile betraying his hunger for power. "The queen is unwell," he announced to the nobles. "Until further notice, the council will rule in her stead." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some accepted his words, but others whispered doubts. Still, fear kept them silent. Elias stood at the edge of the hall, guarded by soldiers. He saw the lie unfold before his eyes, and he knew, if he did nothing, Serafina would vanish, her story buried forever. That night, he sought out the one person he thought he could trust. Leora, the maid who had betrayed him but begged for forgiveness. He found her trembling in the servant quarters, eyes red from crying. "They have her in the underhalls," she whispered. "Old dungeons forgotten by most. Lord Valor keeps her there, waiting for the right time to end it." Elias's jaw tightened. "Then I will go tonight." Leora shook her head. "It is suicide. The underhalls are guarded, and even if you reach her, you cannot escape. The city watches your every step. You will bring war between your people and ours." Elias turned away, his voice low. "Then so be it." As he prepared, doubt gnawed at him. He sat alone in his chamber, sharpening his dagger, staring at the faint glow of the alien city beyond the balcony. His communicator rested on the table. One message, one signal, and human forces would come for him. They would extract him, protect the treaty, and end his involvement. It was the safe choice, the logical one. His hand hovered over it, but then he remembered Serafina's eyes, how they softened when she spoke truth, how they shone with defiance even in chains. He remembered her whisper, "You see me?" Not as a crown but as Seraphina. He clenched his fist. Slowly he pushed the communicator aside. "This isn't about politics anymore," he muttered. "This is about right and wrong." The underhalls were carved deep beneath the palace, a maze of stone and shadows. Few dared to enter, for they reeked of old blood and forgotten screams. Elias moved silently through the darkness, his every step measured, his dagger ready. He had stolen the key from a careless guard, but he knew brute force would soon be required. Torches flickered as he descended. He passed empty cells filled with chains, the ghosts of prisoners who had long since turned to dust. At last he reached the end of the corridor. 2 guards stood before a heavy door, their spears crossed. Elias waited in the shadows, studying them. Then, like a soldier once more, he acted. He threw a stone down the hall. The sound echoed. 1 guard turned. In that heartbeat of distraction, Elias struck. He moved like lightning, slamming one into the wall, silencing him with a blow to the neck. The other tried to shout, but Elias's dagger pressed against his throat before a sound escaped. The door creaked open. Inside, Seraphina sat chained, her silver skin bruised, her crown gone. Yet her eyes still burned with fire. When she saw Elias step through the door, her lips parted in disbelief. "You came," she whispered. Elias knelt beside her, breaking the chains with the stolen key. "Did you think I would leave you here?" Tears filled her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "You risk everything for me. Why?" He hesitated, his voice low but steady. "Because you showed me courage when the rest of your world showed only fear. Because you're not just a queen to me. You're Seraphina." For a moment silence hung between them. Her heart raced, her hands trembling as he pulled her free. But before either could speak more, the sound of footsteps thundered through the corridor. The guards had discovered the bodies. The door burst open. Dozens of soldiers poured in, spears gleaming. At their head stood Lord Valor, his face twisted with fury. "Traitor," he spat. "You dare defile this palace with your human filth? You will die here and the queen will die with you." Elias stepped in front of Seraphina, dagger in hand, his stance firm despite the overwhelming odds. "Then come and try." Seraphina touched his shoulder, her voice calm but fierce. "Elias, if we fall here, we fall together." The corridor filled with the clash of steel as the battle for her freedom and his choice began. The final confession. The clash of steel in the underhall shook the silence of the palace above. Guards shouted, blades struck against stone, and sparks lit the darkness. Elias fought like a man with nothing to lose. His dagger flashed in the torchlight, blocking spears and cutting down enemies who came too close. Seraphina, though freed from her chains, refused to hide. She lifted a broken spear from the ground and stood at Elias's side. Together they held their ground as wave after wave of guards stormed the chamber, but they were outnumbered. Elias's arm bled from a deep cut, his breath ragged. Seraphina's gown was torn, her strength waning. Just when it seemed the tide would overwhelm them, a horn sounded through the halls. The noise froze the soldiers in place. It was the royal horn, a signal only the true ruler could command. Confused whispers spread. How could it sound when the queen was a prisoner? Seraphina lifted her head high. "They know," she whispered. "The palace itself answers me." Dragged into the throne room by Valor's soldiers, Elias and Seraphina now faced the court. Blood stained Elias's tunic, but he stood unbowed. Seraphina's wrists were raw from chains, yet she walked with the dignity of a queen. The chamber was full. Councilors, nobles, guards, and servants packed into the hall, murmuring in shock. The people had heard the horn, and curiosity had drawn them here. Valor stormed forward, his voice like venom. "This queen has betrayed us. She throws away tradition for a human outsider. She is unfit to rule. By the law of our ancestors, she must be stripped of her crown." The councilors shouted in agreement, but the crowd was restless. Some bowed their heads in silence, others frowned in doubt. Seraphina stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. "You call me unfit because I dared to speak my heart. You fear that my truth will unravel the chains you have built. But listen, all of you, those chains do not protect you. They suffocate you." The hall grew quiet. Even the guards hesitated. Elias looked at her, awe filling his chest. Despite everything, she spoke with more strength than any army. Valor laughed bitterly. "Do not be fooled by her words. She is blinded by a human's trickery. Look at him, bleeding, weak, unworthy. Is this who you would trust with your queen? Elias's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, Seraphina's voice rang out like a blade cutting through the noise. Yes, she declared, because when all of you abandoned me to shadows, when you chained me with silence, when you sought to erase me, this human stood by me. He saw me not as a crown, not as a symbol, but as a person. He risked his life when you sought only to save your pride. The crowd gasped. Some councilors shouted angrily, but their voices were drowned by murmurs spreading through the hall. Elias took a step forward, his voice steady despite the pain in his body. I never came here to take power. I never asked for her words. But I will not deny what I've seen. Seraphina is not unfit. She is the only one here brave enough to face truth. He turned his eyes to the people, not the council. You know it too. Look at her. Ask yourselves, do you want rulers who hide in shadows or a queen who speaks her heart even when it endangers her life? The hall trembled with the weight of his words. Valor, furious, drew his blade. Enough, if the council cannot silence you, then I will. He lunged at Elias, the crowd gasped. Elias raised his dagger, but he was too wounded, too slow. Before the blade could strike, Seraphina stepped between them. The steel stopped inches from her chest. Her voice shook the hall. Strike me and the people will see the truth. You are no guardian of tradition. You are a tyrant afraid of losing control. Valor's hand trembled. The hall erupted in shouts, guards stepping back, nobles pushing forward. The tide had shifted. Seize him! A voice cried from among the nobles themselves. In moments, the guards who once served Valor turned their blades on him. He struggled, shouted curses, but he was dragged away, his cries echoing down the halls. Silence followed. All eyes turned to Seraphina and Elias. The queen stood tall, her hand still resting on Elias's arm, steadying him as much as herself. Then, with a voice both fragile and fierce, she spoke to all. You all heard my words before. I did not speak them as a queen. I spoke them as a woman who has known chains and now seeks freedom. I said, I wish you were my husband, human, and I do not take those words back. Because in him I found the courage I had forgotten. In him I found the respect my own world denied me. The hall was silent, hearts pounding, breaths held. Then slowly voices rose, not in anger but in support. Nobles bowed their heads. Servants whispered blessings. Even some councilors lowered their eyes in shame. Seraphina's confession had become more than a scandal. It had become a spark of change. Elias looked at her, his voice low, meant only for her. You've just changed your world forever. She met his gaze, tears shining in her eyes, but her lips curved into a soft smile. Not alone. With you. That night the palace did not sleep. The people of Zealon would speak of the human and the queen, of the throne room filled with gasps and whispers, of the moment when truth broke chains. And though their future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Seraphina and Elias had stood together when the world tried to tear them apart. And the entire palace, once bound in silence, had witnessed their final confession.